All right, folks, this is the note video on China. So China is the second of three Asian countries that we'll talk about in regards to imperialism. China is the third note sheet in your green packet. It's on the back of the page that you did about India. It's just one page. Try to keep it kind of short. So right now we're focusing on imperialism through Asia. So we've already talked about British imperialism in India. Now we're going to look at the impact of European imperialism on China. If you have the green note packet that I handed out in class on Friday, March 13th, fill this out as you go. As I've mentioned, feel free to pause. Feel free to work on your study guide as you go. Write down any questions that you have. If you did not get the note sheet that I passed out in class, I have attached it to this Google announcement. You can either take notes on your own. Do not feel like you have to write every single thing out, maybe just important things, or you really have to self-assess. Do you understand it? Be honest with yourself. Don't just skim through and say, oh yeah, I get that, fine. Go through and really make sure you're challenging yourself to understand the material. If you have access to a printer and you feel comfortable, you're welcome to obviously print the sheets. Please do not feel like you have to print all of these. I don't want to see anybody wasting all their ink just for that. Like I said, everything's figure outable. If you just watch this and really sit and process it and feel like you understand it, then don't feel like you need to print it out. Most of you have this copy though. So, all right, here we go. The impact of European imperialism on China. So here's a map. Here's China. Hopefully most of you have a general knowledge of where China is in the world. Often refer to themselves as the Middle Kingdom and viewed outsiders as barbarians and did not want to trade with foreign merchants. It's important to note, China was very closed off to trade worldwide. As a matter of fact, they built a great wall to protect themselves from northern attacks from people they called barbarians. And so China was kind of this exotic land for Europeans. Europeans really wanted to trade with China because they felt like they had materials that they really desired or that they really wanted. Europeans and other outsiders did gain access to China through the Silk Road. I think most students have a previous knowledge of the Silk Road, at least a little bit. It's this main route in between Asia and the Mediterranean. Obviously, it was not an actual road made of silk because that would be really slippery. However, it is, it was this path where silk was traded. So as a result, China becomes a dominant empire in Asia and across the world as a result of the Silk Road. China did trade, which helped spread the Chinese culture through Asia. So traded goods that they had, back and forth for various other goods. And you can see here on the map, things that they traded and who they traded with. However, China was very strict and rightfully so, in expecting that outside merchants obeyed Chinese rules and showed respect. It's very much if you visit a friend's home, you obey their rules. If they ask you to take off your shoes, take off your shoes. If they ask you to, whatever they would ask you to do, you would follow their rules and their customs of their home. So, makes sense that China asked people from the outside to follow their rules and show respect. Couple examples here of how China, kind of grew and developed. You will not have to remember dates or anything, but just as a frame of reference. In 1614, northern invaders called the Manchus conquered China and create the Qing dynasty. So China is now controlled by the Qing dynasty. 1644. Two of the challenges that are going to face China's future under the Qing dynasty are a population boom. So we've talked a little bit about population, particularly during the Industrial Revolution. The more people you have, the more mouths you have to feed, the more people you have just to worry about in general. So the more people that China has, the more peasants they have, and then there's more competition for land. Land showed status. Land allowed people to farm, and obviously it was a desirable thing during that time. European missionaries and merchants are also going to arrive in China during this time. All of these red lines on here show trade routes, and China was a hotspot. China was a place people wanted to trade, and so a lot of these merchants arrive in Asia hoping to trade and sell their goods in China. In 1793, Chinese Emperor Qianlong wrote a letter to the British King, King George III. King George III had asked Qianlong, or Emperor Long, to trade. And you can see here, Emperor Long says, "Strange and costly objects do not interest me. As your ambassador can see for himself, we possess all things. I set no value on objects strange or ingenious and have no use for your country's manufactures." So if you want to take a second, pause this video, maybe say out loud to yourself, okay, what was the emperor saying to the king, right? Like, what does this mean? So if you want to challenge yourself, pause this, think for yourself for a second, what is the emperor saying? Okay, so when we come back, we look at this, the ambassador. This would be the British ambassador to China. And the emperor is basically saying, look, we have all the things. We don't need any more things. I have no value on the things you're making. You know, at this time, England would have wanted to start maybe selling some of their industrialized goods, manufactured goods. And Emperor Long saying, look, I don't have any value for those things. I don't want them. Thanks but no thanks. Hit the road. We don't want to continue trading those things with you. So this kind of drove the British crazy. The British really wanted to trade. Think about when you were younger, maybe you do this now, and you really wanted to trade something in your lunch with a friend, and that friend did not want to trade with you. Often that makes you want to trade even more, and that's exactly what happens here. The Chinese did not want to trade. They often were rejecting trade offers. They felt like they could be self-sufficient and like they did not need the things that Europe had to offer. They felt like their economy was good. They had enough natural resources. Their agriculture, their food was okay. The things that they had were fine. The manufactured products they made, like silk, cotton clothes, and porcelain, was doing them just fine. And they felt like they did not need to trade with other countries, such as England. So China exported goods to European merchants, but did not buy European products. So China would send stuff to Europe to sell. Great, China's making money, no big deal. However, China would not buy stuff from Europe or from England, and that drove them crazy, particularly the British. The British were very, very passionate about wanting to sell their goods in China. And so the Chinese refusing to buy that really upset Europeans, particularly the British. The British are going to be desperate to find a product that the Chinese are willing to buy. So this is, I mentioned this in the notes for, India, right? I mentioned this in the notes for India, that the British are going to start smuggling opium from India into China. Now, opium is highly addictive. If you remember hearing in recent history about the opioid crisis that hit the Dayton area pretty hard, that's where the opioids come from. It's a derivative of opium. If you look at them chemically, they're incredibly, incredibly close. And so it's highly addictive, and it can wreak havoc, and it can kill people. And the British smuggle that into China. Now, China had banned this, which that leads to the word there, smuggle. And this really upsets the Chinese. So by 1835, 12 million Chinese citizens are addicted to opium. China is going to outlaw opium and appoint Commissioner Lin to try to end the opium smuggling. I mean, that's what we did here in the United States, right? We appointed people to try to fix the opioid crisis. So if you look at the very last page of your notes, And this is attached on here as a part of the document that has the handout of notes as well if you don't have your green note packet. There is a letter. And actually, you know what? I am just going to, sorry guys, just give me a second. I'm just going to put this up here because I think it will help our understanding. So this letter right here, this is attached. This is on the back of your green sheet. This is what I want you to look at right now. So it says, although opium was used in China for centuries, it was not until the opening of the tea trade with British merchants that China was able to import large quantities of the drug. By the early 1800s, opium was the major product that the English East India Company traded in China, and opium addiction was becoming a widespread social problem. When the emperor's own son died of an overdose, he decided to put an end to the trade. Commissioner Lin Hisu, was sent to Canton, the chief trading port of the East India Company, with instructions to negotiate an end to the importation of opium into China. The English merchants were uncooperative, so he seized their stores of opium. This led to the immediate military action known as the Opium Wars. The Chinese were decisively defeated and had to cede to a humiliating treaty that legalized the opium trade. As a result, Commissioner Lin was dismissed from the office and sent into exile. The following are excerpts from Commissioner Lin's letter of advice to Queen Victoria, which was written before the outbreak of the Opium Wars. It is unknown whether Queen Victoria ever read this letter. All right, so honestly, guys, if we were in class right now, what I would do is I would pause. I would ask you to read these excerpts and answer the questions to the right. I might ask you to do it with a group or a partner. If you want to do it with a partner at your house, somebody's willing to work with you, be my guest. I'm happy to allow that, of course. But otherwise, pause the video, take a second, answer these questions, and then unpause, come back, and we'll go over it together. All right, obviously I cannot, know whether you paused it or not. If you did not choose to do that, then that, it's all right. It's not the end of the world. But then follow along at least as I go over this, please. All right, so the first excerpt right here. We find that your country is distant from us about 60 or 70,000 Chinese miles. That your foreign ships come hither striving the one with the other for our trade, and for the simple reason of their strong desire to reap a profit. By what principle of reason, then, should these foreigners send in return a poisonous drug which involves in the destruction those very natives of China? Without meaning to say that the foreigners harbor such destructive intentions in their hearts, we yet positively assess that from their inordinate thirst after gain, they are perfectly careless about the injuries they inflict upon us, and such being And such being the case, we should like to ask what has become of the conscience which heaven has implanted in the breast of all men. So Commissioner Lin, how does he describe the British merchants? Basically says they don't have a heart, right? Like, how can you guys bring this? What is your intention? You're just here to make money. What principle of reason is it that you're sending this drug here to destroy our natives? Basically questioning, like, do you have a heart here? We have heard, so second one right here. We have heard that in your own country, opium is prohibited with the utmost strictness and severity. This is a strong proof that you know full well how hurtful it is to mankind. Since then you do not permit it injure your own country, you ought not to have the injurious drug transferred to another country, and above all others, how much less to the inner land of the products which China exports to your foreign countries. There is not one which is not beneficial to mankind in some shape or another. All right, so if you got through all of that, basically you're looking at why does Commissioner Lim, what reason does he give for wanting to stop the opium smuggling into China? And he says, listen, Britain, you don't allow your own people to do it. You know that this is hurtful, so why are you doing it to our country? The third excerpt. On the other hand, the things that come from your foreign countries are only calculated to make presents of or serve for mere amusement. It is quite the same to us if we have them or if we have them not. If then these are of no material consequence to us in the inner land, what difficulty would there be in prohibiting and shutting our market against them? All right, here, what's he saying about the China's desire for British goods? He's like, well, we don't need them. We have no desire. It doesn't matter to us if we have them or not. So basically, if you quit bringing opium into our country, we're going to quit allowing you to trade with us. All right, the last part. Our celestial empire rules over 10,000 kingdoms. Most surely we do possess a measure of godlike majesty which ye cannot fathom. Still, we cannot bear to slay or exterminate without previous warning, and it is for this reason that we not clearly make known to you the fixed laws of our land. If the foreign merchants of your said honorable nation desire to continue their commercial intercourse, then they must tremblingly obey our recorded statutes. They must cut off forever the source from which the opium flows, and on no account make an experiment of our laws in their own persons. Let your highness immediately upon the receipt of this communication inform us promptly of the state of matters and of the measure you are pursuing utterly to put a stop to the opium evil. Please let your reply be speedy. Do not make excuses or procrastinate. A most important communication. All right, so that last part threatened to do is basically saying we're just going to cut off trade. We don't need you. If you keep doing this, we're done. We're cutting you off. Don't make an experiment of us. Stop or else. All right, so hopefully you got through that. Sorry that took a little longer than I had anticipated. But we went through the letter. As you read, Britain does not end the opium trade. China declares war on Britain. Britain's, they've industrialized. They have a modern navy. They easily win that opium war. So the war between, if you go back here, the war between China and Britain, the Treaty of Nanjing ends it. Britain is going to receive a part of Hong Kong and extraterritorial rights in China. Basically, they're now able to come into China, trade, and not have to follow Chinese laws. China's facing problems with their own people. We talked about the growing population. We talked about how agriculture can't keep up to feed those people. And so the Taiping Rebellion will be a rebellion amongst Chinese people who are going to basically, remember when the French Revolution, we said don't mess with hangry people? That's what's happening here. The peasants are going to basically rebel because they are tired of the situation in China. The Qing dynasty will be defeated, and the rebellion, unfortunately, in the end, 20 million people die, and it really weakens China as a whole. Well, the rest of the world sees that China is weak, and they're going to take advantage. Basically, Britain will force China to sign trade treaties and take advantage of China trading with them. This is where spheres of influence comes into play. Spheres of influence was a type of imperialism we talked about in your motives notes. And basically, this is where foreign nations are going to just trade in China. So China will not become a British colony, will not become a colony of any European country, but Europe will decide that they want to trade with China, and they'll basically carve it up and say, okay, I'm trading here, and you can see the map right here. Britain's going to trade here, France is going to trade here, the Japanese are going to trade here, the Russians are going to trade here. And China was not strong enough to do anything about it. Now, around this time, the United States is starting to get onto the imperialism scene. And next year in U.S. history, you'll learn more about that. But they don't want to get left out. So we do not talk about the United States imperializing in any other area in this unit except for here in China. And so the U.S. is like the little kid on the playground who doesn't get picked for a game and is like, hey, guys, let's play a game that, that we can all take a part in. And so the U.S. proposes the open door policy and basically says all the countries can come in and trade freely, and you don't have to just trade in your own specific area. And so the U.S. doesn't want to get shut out. Obviously, the Chinese, they don't like this. They don't want to just have to openly trade and being forced to trade. And this upsets many Chinese people. So they are going to lead a rebellion. It's called the Boxer Rebellion. They're trying to get rid of the Chinese. It's called the Boxer Rebellion because they fight in a manner with their hands like boxers. The Chinese do not have an industrialized military like the British and the Americans, and so this is going to lead to the Americans winning, putting down the Boxer Rebellion, frustrating the Chinese even further, and breaking China up into spheres of influence. Reformers will look for ways to fix China. By 1911, Sun Yat-sen will overthrow the Qing dynasty, create a democracy, write a constitution, try to promote nationalism, democracy, and security for Chinese citizens, which will end the dynasties of China. All right, guys, that is it for China. You'll be doing Japan next. Hopefully you're not doing these all at once. I do apologize. They're a little lengthy. Hopefully you're pausing it as you go if necessary. All right. Hope everyone's doing well, and you'll hear from me in the Japan note.